One aspect of Band of Brothers that has always puzzled me is how so many historical inaccuracies ended up in the series. Richard Winters, often regarded as the guardian of Easy Company, closely reviewed the script, just as he had carefully overseen Stephen Ambrose's book years earlier. Both Winters and Tom Hanks publicly stated that the series would avoid embellishment and remain faithful to the historical record. If you've watched my previous videos on historical accuracy, you'll know that this promise didn't quite hold up. The most significant mistake in the series concerns Albert Blithe's fate. Although Stephen Ambrose had removed the incorrect claim from later editions of his book, it somehow still appeared in the television adaptation. The misunderstanding began when Bill Guarnier told Ambrose that he and Edward Heffron had attended Albert Blithe's funeral in 1948. They genuinely believed they were paying their respects to their former comrade, but the funeral was actually for another man with the same name. Richard Winters later shared his own thoughts about the mistake involving Blithe. Winters still maintained that Blithe had been wounded in the neck, which wasn't actually true. Since Winters wasn't present during that incident, it's possible that his recollection of events relied on second-hand information. But he believed the presentation was unfair to Blithe. According to Winters, the situation had been exaggerated and did not accurately represent the man. He went on to provide some background on Blithe, saying it was only fair to tell the full story. While Blithe did experience overwhelming fear and temporarily shut down mentally during combat, Winters recalled visiting him at the aid station after being wounded himself. As he checked on his injured men, he spoke with Blithe, and that conversation appeared to snap him out of his condition. Afterward, Blithe recovered and returned to duty. Later, Blithe volunteered for another patrol near Carentan. During that mission, he was wounded and evacuated. That, however, was far from the end of his military career. After recovering from his serious throat injury, or at least what many at the time believed to be a severe wound, Blithe returned home following World War II. Rather than leaving military service behind, he volunteered to serve again during the Korean War. He joined the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team and took part in a combat jump that placed his unit directly into the middle of a Chinese division. Despite the dangerous circumstances, Blithe distinguished himself in combat, earning the Silver Star. He later received the Bronze Star as well, adding to the Purple Heart he had already earned during World War II. His decorations spoke for themselves. By the time he eventually retired from the Army, he had risen from the rank of private to first sergeant. Although many believed he had died in 1948, the historical record was incorrect. Albert Blithe actually lived until 1967, spending his later years in northwest Philadelphia before his death. Although he became a casualty during the Normandy campaign, his later service proved his courage and commitment beyond any doubt. Some time ago, I made a video discussing the error in Band of Brothers concerning Albert Blithe. The series portrays him being shot in the neck in Normandy before dying from those wounds 4 years later in 1948. It also includes 2 scenes showing Blithe finding Edelweiss flowers on the uniforms of German paratroopers. Historically, the Edelweiss insignia was primarily associated with Austrian soldiers serving in German mountain divisions rather than paratroopers. Where this idea originated remains unknown. It wasn't included in Ambrose's book, and no one involved in producing the series had contacted Blithe's family while developing the script. Richard Winters was present during the night patrol depicted in the series when Blithe supposedly discovers the flower, yet Winters never mentioned any such incident in his own diary. The scene in the aid station involving Blithe temporarily losing his vision, however, was documented at the time and is supported by historical accounts. Much of what we know about Albert Blithe's life after the war comes from interviews given by his son Gordon years after the series aired. Gordon once asked his father, "Dad, did you kill anyone during the war?" Albert looked at him silently before slowly nodding his head. He never elaborated. Outside of combat, Albert Blithe was known as a cheerful man who loved making people laugh. He especially enjoyed dancing. He and his wife frequently spent evenings dancing at the NCO club at Fort Bragg until late into the night. Albert Blithe enlisted in the Army in 1942, partly because he wanted a fresh start away from Philadelphia for personal reasons. The military offered exactly that opportunity. He completed his training at Camp Toccoa, Georgia in August 1942 under Captain Herbert Sobel. According to his family, Blithe genuinely loved military life, and serving as a paratrooper became a source of great pride. Following parachute training and deployment to England, Blithe jumped into Normandy on D-Day. Like many paratroopers, he landed far from his intended drop zone. He came down in a ditch, unsure of his location and overwhelmed by the reality of combat. Exhausted and disoriented, he eventually fell asleep for an unknown period. Other scattered paratroopers eventually found him. They too had missed their assigned landing areas, and together they made their way across the countryside. Blithe eventually reached Saint-Marcouf, where he reunited with the rest of Easy Company. After only a brief rest, the regiment received orders to attack Carentan. Following intense fighting, Easy Company secured the town after overcoming determined German resistance. Later, while at the aid station, Blithe sat staring blankly ahead. Lieutenant Richard Winters, who was there being treated for a leg wound, asked him what was wrong. After speaking with him and offering encouragement, Winters watched as Blithe gradually regained his vision before rejoining the company. Soon afterward, Easy Company encountered a suspicious farmhouse while on patrol. Carson and Nixon requested volunteers to investigate it. Blithe stepped forward and, accompanied by 2 other men, moved toward the building. During the patrol, he was struck in the shoulder by a German sniper using wooden bullets. Easy Company was withdrawn from the line later that same day. Contrary to what Band of Brothers depicts, Blithe was not wounded in the neck. His shoulder injury left a permanent scar. The bullet that struck him on his 21st birthday is shown on the left side of the green display in the accompanying image. Over the course of his military career, Albert Blithe earned the Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, the Army of Occupation Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. While serving with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, he was also named Trooper of the Year. Blithe received his Purple Heart for the wounds he suffered on June 25, 1944, and remained in Army hospitals until his release on October 8, 1945. After returning to Philadelphia, he began working for Westinghouse Electric before being recalled to active duty for the Korean War. During that conflict, he eventually attained the rank of Master Sergeant. He married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and the family later lived in North Carolina. Albert Blithe died on December 17, 1967, while serving at a U.S. Army base in Germany. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His wife later reflected that Albert had endured unimaginable hardships during the war, but never lost his love for the Army. In her words, no one loved serving as a paratrooper more than he did. Fellow Easy Company veteran Don Malarkey also remembered Blithe fondly. One story always stood out to him. Albert enjoyed dice games but almost never rolled the dice himself. Instead, he always bet against the shooter, and somehow, he almost always walked away with the money.